Welcome to KPMG's Ethics Roundtable. Today we have gathered together some of the best minds in the field of business ethics to talk about building an ethical culture. We all agree an ethical culture is essential, but the more difficult challenge is determining how an organization builds an ethical culture that stands the test of time. Steve Priest is president of the Ethical Leadership Group and has done ethics consulting in over 40 countries for organizations in most major industries. The Wall Street Journal has said Mr. Priest has become one of the most sought-after consultants to keep companies on the straight and narrow. Steve, what does a strong ethical culture look like, and how do we know it when we see it?
Well, we've had the privilege of doing work in over 40 countries around the world, and everywhere around the world, they define an ethical culture the same way. It's what kind of company would we want to work for? What kind of company would I want to buy from? What kind of company would I trust with my investment dollars, what I invest in? And the company that lives up to those really hard standards is an ethical company and a winning company. The more interesting question to me is, what are the obstacles to creating a winning company, an ethical company? And our research over the past 16 years shows there are several. One is when employees don't understand the rules or the values, or don't believe that they really apply to them, they apply to someone else. Another is when they believe that management doesn't talk the talk or walk the talk. And so it's incumbent on management and leaders at every level, and everybody at KPMG is a leader, to walk the talk and talk the talk. Two other points we'll talk about more today, but just to get them out on the table. Employees need to have an environment where they feel free to bring up bad news. You know, one company we worked in, the person said, around here, the first whale to the surface gets the harpoon. And you can imagine how much bad news came up in that organization. And the final quality is really accountability. There are a lot of companies out there where if you're a great performer, you get a pass. You're a great performer, you violate the code, you don't live up to the values, doesn't matter because you're making the numbers. So a company that's hitting on all four of those cylinders is one that's going to be creating an ethical culture, one that you defined early on, a culture where people do the right things every day as automatically. It's just part of the everyday behavior.
Steve, you mentioned it's not an easy thing sometimes to raise your hand, and certainly one of the great challenges in that respect is the fear of retaliation. How's the best way to guard against retaliation, and how does that play into the difficulties that you were pointing out?
Well, first, just to debunk one myth. Fear of retaliation is not the number one reason people don't report. And in the almost every organization we've worked with, the majority of employees who see bad things go on don't report. Roughly 60% never raise their hand. That's a big problem. They say the second reason for not doing that is fear of retaliation. The first reason is they don't think management will respond appropriately anyway. So why take a risk if they're just gonna, it's a good old boys or good old girls club or whatever, and they're not gonna do anything. So there are two big challenges for leadership, for everybody to live up to. In terms of addressing a fear of retaliation, it takes time and a lot of the things that have already been discussed. It takes stories, non-formal stories, but grapevine stories, or I think the grapevine is gone now. Now it's Twitter stories about reality of what's happened to people who've reported. It takes solid policies. It takes monitoring. KPMG is one of the few companies that actually looks for signs of retaliation, monitors for signs of retaliation. It's a terrific practice. But it really is, it's just going to take time the old-fashioned way, by people telling each other that, yeah, you know, this is a company where you get rewarded for doing the right thing, and that includes raising your hand when you have a concern.